Now, how exactly does this work? Why must this human technology always be so Aha! Hello there, humans of the internet. My name is Almondix Chestnut. I am a squeak from Planet Tree. Together with my human friend Elias, who will be lending his hand to today's video, I am going to explain to you this board game named Akhet. I am told it is about agriculture of some ancient human civilization. Well then, onwards with the video. Akhet is a roll and write game. That means you are going to roll dice and you are going to write things on a sheet, which you can see behind me. It is the player sheet. The name also already implies that every player needs one of those, as well as those dice that you can see here. Notice that two of them are of a different color. When you play a session, make sure that every player plays on exactly the same sheet. Akhet comes with different ones, each featuring different layouts, as well as some special rules. Also note that every single sheet has both a day and a night side for variety. So again, make sure that everyone uses exactly the same sheet. This is sheet A, the default game, so to speak. It has no special rules and will be used for the remainder of this video. In Akhet, all the human players compete for the highest score. To score in this game, you will allot land fields to farmers, and you will make sure that these farms are then irrigated using the river. Scores for each row of your sheet will be recorded in these white boxes. With this in mind, the overall layout of the sheet should already become clear. You have land fields on both sides of the river, which I am told is called Nile by Elias, and these are divided into rows, each of which can be scored. Overall, there are 3 sections to score, denoted A, B, and C, as well as some final score that is affected by several boni, as well as other special rules. Let's prepare to play. Setup is very easy. Every player rolls his or her dice once and puts them in this tray. Also, all players must agree on a common set of bonus table cells. Use whatever random method you desire to determine these cells, but make sure to use only a single cell per column of the table. Alright, the first turn can then begin. At the beginning of each turn, all players must take the dice out of their trays without changing any value. So those are the same that were deposited in the tray last turn or during setup. These are called the available dice because they are available to you during this turn. Out of his or her own available dice, every player must now select one. In our example, let's go with the 3 here. With a selected die, you can do one of 4 things, which we will go through in order. The first possible action using some die is to allot land to your farmers. For this, we will consult the shape table at the top of the sheet. The shape table lists for each value, 3 in our case, 1 or 2 possible shapes, which we can draw onto land fields on our sheet. Again, our selected die has a value 3, so this is the column that applies. We have the choice between this shape or that shape. We are going to choose the lower. Please note that we can rotate or mirror any of the shapes as we see fit. Let's allot the 3. For example, like this. After you have used a die for whatever action, you must always deposit it, again without changing the value, into the dice tray of your right neighbor. At this point, you must wait for your fellow human players to do the same, and eventually a dice will be deposited into your dice tray as well. Afterwards, we can basically begin the same process again. So now everyone selects from his or her available dice again. Let's go with the 1 this time. With the general play structure now established, let's talk about the actual rules for allotting land fields to your farmers. Well, first of all, your target fields must be land fields, because you're allotting land. Second, the shape you are going to draw cannot include rock fields, such as these ones, or sinkholes, such as those. These types of land fields can never be allotted. Finally, your shape must either include at least 1 land field of the top row, or it must be adjacent, that means horizontally, diagonally, or vertically to an already existing shape, like this one. Now let's allot the 1. So then, let's continue. This time, let's say we are going to pick one of the black ones, the 6. Having learned about the first type of action already, let's do the second type now. We are going to use the 6 to irrigate. For irrigation, there is no shape table. We simply write the corresponding value in one of the fields of the river. The same placement rules apply. Either we choose one of the fields of the top row, or we must write the value next to an already existing one. So, in this case, we irrigate for 6. Let's pick this one. Since you humans can perceive color very well, you will have noticed that this time we picked a black die. And you might ask yourself, well, what's the significance? Well, I will tell you. Each time you use one of your black dice for an action, you must then re-roll all of your remaining dice. This is not optional. You have to do this. So, in our case, no matter its color though, we have to pass on this die to our neighbor without changing its value. We still have available dice, so that means the turn continues and we have to pick one again. Let's go with the 4. By now we have explained 2 of the 4 different types of actions you can do with a die, namely allotting land and irrigating. Let's discuss the third one now, which is saving a die, effectively not using it right now, but instead remembering its value for later usage. To this end, simply draw the corresponding face value into your leftmost free scroll. Obviously, you cannot save a die when you don't have a free scroll. I don't need to explain that to a smart human like you, do I? Now, at this point, the turn is almost over, and our next pick from the available dice is obvious. We are going to pick the 6. I should actually talk about the final of the 4 types of actions, which is called skipping. The problem is this action is impossible at the moment because it requires us to sacrifice a scored row and we have never scored. So we have to postpone that a little. Bear with me. For now, we simply are going to allot again using this final die. Why are we allotting again? Well, because I want to explain this special case. When allotting with a 6, you can either draw its own shape, as usual, or you can decide to interpret this 6 as 2 subsequent 3s, which means we are going to pick from this column twice, drawing 2 shapes. There is one condition. One shape must be drawn to the left of the river, and the other one must be drawn to its right. So we draw a shape of 3 to the left, and we draw another one to the right of the river. Since the die we picked is a black one, we now must re-roll all remaining available dice. Well, that's pretty easy. And then we pass on our die, and since it is the final one, this turn is now complete. At the end of each turn, every human player individually checks if it is time to score some rows on his or her sheet. You must score if you have allotted or irrigated in any of these rows at least once during a turn. If so, you will have to score the section above that is indicated by the arrow. If this row was triggering scoring, I would then have to score all of these rows. And yes, this does mean that some of you will score earlier than others. Once necessary scoring has been conducted and everyone is ready, we can start the next turn, which, you will recall, begins by taking the dice from your tray without changing the value. You now have available dice again and can start the turn. Let's pick one of the 2s this time. Now we are going to explain scrolls and how they are used. Before deciding on an action, and regardless of the color of the selected die, we can use a scroll, that means filling out this little black space below the scroll, to turn the die to that particular face value. So we use the scroll showing a 4 to flip this die. Obviously, we can use each scroll only once. After changing a value, play continues normally. For example, we could allot using this 4, and then subsequently pass this on and re-roll. At this point in the video, that means having explained pretty much everything except the final type of action, which is called skipping, remember, and scoring on your sheet, we are going to skip ahead a few turns now, until something more interesting happens. Well, to be precise, until scoring occurs. And that concludes the turn. Now we must check if scoring is required, and indeed this time it is, since we did both allot and irrigate in this row. For now, we must score these 3 rows because it is indicated so. We score rows individually, so let's start with the first one. Now, the ancient human civilization depicted in this game farmed near this river because this river regularly rose to high levels, thus irrigating the surrounding lands and making them fertile. First, we execute flooding. That means we compute the sum of these two values, in this case 8, and then the Nile floods outwards. So let's flood 8 fields, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. We simply count crosses for this row, which computes our score, in this case 8. Let's flood the second row. Our sum here is 7, and let's start at the right side of the river, which means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Note that during flooding, we have always alternated between the left and the right side of the river. It is our choice where to start, but we must alternate, which becomes relevant in a second and is also very relevant for sinkhole fields. Note furthermore that not all of the fields received a cross. These two were not allotted, the rocks because they cannot be allotted, and this one because we simply didn't do it. Remember, we count only crosses, so we will receive no points from these fields. Even worse, our flooding didn't even reach this field, so that one received neither a strike nor a cross. To compute the score, we again count crosses, which in this case would be 5, but we have to subtract the number of allotted fields which were not flooded, which is in this case 1. So our overall score for this row is just 4. 5 minus 1. Let's score the third row. In this one, you can find an oasis field. An oasis has a special property. It increases the number of flooded fields in a row by 1. So while our sum here is only 7, we do actually get to flood 8 fields. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Resulting in an overall score of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of 5. This concludes our scoring. And afterwards, the next turn begins. Again, we shall skip a bit now. So we passed on the final die. And let's conclude this turn by checking if we need to score. And indeed we do need to score because we allotted in this row. Here, we actually did it twice. You can also see it here. And that means we need to now score section B of our sheet, 4 rows. So let's do that. The first row of section B actually contains our first sinkhole. So let's explain the rules for the sinkhole while we score. We will start on the left and, as usual, fill the fields with either a cross or a strike. And then we reach the sinkhole. Instead of just a single strike, a sinkhole requires 3, as seen on the field itself. While it is not fully flooded, which means until it has 3 strokes, we do not alternate the river sides. So our sum was 9. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The sinkhole is now the field that gets flooded next. So it's 7, 8, 9, and our sum is reached, and we stop the flooding. If our sum for this row was 10 instead, we would have alternated to the other side, so to the field on the left. But it isn't, which means we did allot this field, but failed to flood it. Further note that we could have avoided this by actually starting here instead of here, so it does make a difference which side of the river you pick during flooding. We receive 5 points in this row. The second row of B is uneventful. Just be mindful of the effect of the oasis. So it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but the oasis increases that to 8. We receive 7 points. For the next row, our sum is 9, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and now there are no more land fields. This is called overflooding, because our sum is higher than we have available land fields. In this case, we must fill out the score box of that row, thereby losing everything we could have gained. Obviously, overflooding is something you want to avoid. For the last row of B, our sum is 7, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and we do reach 7 points.
With scoring now properly explained, you might wonder, what are these numbers in the middle of the river? Well, they show you the ideal sum for each of the rows, pre-computed for your convenience. They include sinkholes and oasis fields, and thereby make it easier to hit the ideal number per row. We will now skip forward again.
And now we have 1 die remaining, and the conclusion of the video is near. This 4 here represents a problem. We cannot irrigate since there are no free Nile fields, and the 4 has a shape that does fit, well, nowhere anymore. Finally, while we could change it to a 3 using the 1 remaining scroll that we have, the 3 also does not have a shape that fits anywhere. Long story short, we cannot make use of this die. This means we have to skip it, which is the final type of action I promised a few minutes ago. So let's talk about that now. Skipping a die means not doing anything with it, and in return we have to sacrifice a row, which is similar to what happens when we have an overflooding situation. We can pick only rows that already have been scored and have a positive score. But of course we can pick our worst row, like this one. So let's sacrifice the row, and then the die is skipped. Since this was the last die, we have to check for scoring again, and yes, again we have to score. At this point, it is important to point out that the very last row of the sheet, which is triggering the current scoring, is never scored itself. It only triggers scoring of section C. So it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which gives us 6 points. The next one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, which gives us 5. And last but not least, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, mind the oasis, 8, for which we receive 6 points. Having scored section C, we are out of the game. If at the end of any turn some players are out of the game, while other players are still playing, so they are not out, everyone who is out receives 1 extra point, which we just note somewhere on our sheet, like this. This is 1 extra point. In other words, if you manage to conclude the game faster, you receive a bit of extra. When we are out of the game, but others are still playing, we still participate as normal and have available die, but we actually skip the action. So yeah, we might select a die, but we then don't do anything with it and simply pass it on. Note that if we pick a black one, we are still re-rolling these, so we might try to re-roll for a really bad die. Well, bad for our neighbor, of course. Once a turn ends and every player is out, we now compute the final score, which will determine the winner, obviously. The final score is computed using the individual scores of all the rows, any extra points we might have managed to get, and the bonus table. We didn't discuss the table yet, but it's very simple. In each column, there is 1 active cell, which gives us a condition to satisfy. And if we manage to do that, we can add this to our final score. In this session, we did not pay that much attention to the bonus table, and now that the game's over and we check, we can see that we only managed to satisfy this one, which states to only save values lower than the previous scroll, which we managed to do. So let's compute the final score. All the rows sum up to 49. We have 1 extra point, so we have a 50, plus 3 bonus points, so we end up with 53 as our overall score, and the highest score obviously wins the game. And now you know how to play Akhet, the game about agriculture of some ancient human civilization next to their holy river, or whatever the river actually was to them. Please refer to the rulebook for variants, tiebreaker rules, and other minute detail. Until next time, humans of the internet, when I explain another board game. Have fun!